As we all know, progress very often comes at great cost. Inventors know this all too well. The bigger the technological leap you want to make, the bigger the risk you may very well incur. And that was especially the case with the invention of the combat submersible, the submarine. Now, you might think that the humble submarine was invented roughly around the time of the First World War, seeing as how they were very famously used to blockade Britain on behalf of that plucky Willie fellow. But nay, it goes back way further than that. All the way back in the 1770s, they were tinkering around with this concept. So, if not World War I, then when was the first use of a combat submarine? 1863, during the American Civil War. Yes, really. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, 1863, the American Civil War, technology was so basic back then, how the hell did they make a submarine? Well, they did in fact make a submarine that saw combat. But I didn't say it was a good submarine, though. In fact, the thing was far more trouble than it was actually worth, and it ended up actually killing a lot more of their own men than it did the enemy. But that didn't stop them from trying to use it anyway. The H.L. Hunley. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. As you all know, I'm a great big fan of freedom of speech. So much so that I am very obnoxious about using it on Twitter. But if you've been trying to follow what's been going on over the last few years, good luck, because the man is constantly burying anything that actually matters under a flood of nonsense and partisan claptrap in a massive astroturfing campaign. Ever played Metal Gear Solid 2? Yeah, they're doing that. I do my best to counteract it on the second channel, but sadly, Balatro won't play itself. So, I'm always 2 weeks behind the curve on any important stories, but fortunately, there's a better way to cut through the noise and see what they're trying to hide without getting your best mate's little sister killed. Ground News. Since owning the libs is my job, Ground News is not in the business of telling you what to think. Instead, their small, independent team cuts through the noise and presents you the news without spin, showing every perspective that is being reported from, every financial and political incentive to do so, and who's ignoring or actually reporting on the facts. Except for your Uncle Barry. Even they don't know what he's on about. So instead of sealing you in a comforting little hug box, Ground News just lays out all of the information you need and lets you come to your own conclusions. Ground News' story analysis feature makes this even easier. Not only do they provide a summary based on every article about the subject, but they also make it easy to compare and contrast coverage by different outlets. And they even show where both sides agree, on the rare occasion that that's actually possible. For example, take the fact that Meta is ending its fact-checking efforts, which is rustling a few jimmies at the moment. Obviously, the right is taking a victory lap because of the step forward for freedom of speech and increasing shift away from platforms censoring content. However, the left is taking a bit more of an alarmist tone, saying that this is an attack on the truth and that misinformation will now spread unchecked. But Ground News makes sure to cover both angles, and its comprehensive analysis will help to make sense of both the issue and its implications now that Trump is back. All while giving you the room to form your own opinion. So, for a limited time, you can go to ground.news/CD or scan the QR code on the screen to save 40% on Ground News' unlimited access Vantage plan and get the truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. You can even gift it to someone else if you want to have more informed conversations or you're just really tired of Uncle Barry's schizo ramblings. Now, a lot of people credit the HL Hunley as the first ever combat submarine, but that title actually belongs to the Turtle, which was a single-man submarine that was built by David Bushnell and first launched during the American Revolutionary War in 1775, when the Americans planned to use the Turtle to sink the SS Eagle by sneaking up to the ship in the submarine and sticking a bomb to the ship's hull and then hand-pedaling out of the danger zone, because yes, you had to actually crank the propeller with your hand. However, while testing the submarine, the operation was plagued with problems such as darkness, strong currents, and the single occupant only having about 20 minutes of air. So, the plan never went ahead, and the Turtle was never deployed in combat. So, nearly 100 years later, we get the Hunley. And its story begins with the Second American Civil War. The first was technically the Revolutionary War. The US Navy was already toying with the idea of submarines in the form of the USS Alligator on the eve of 1861. And naturally, Old Dixie wasn't too far behind, with the big three engineers of James McClintock, Balder Watson, and Horace L. Hunley coming together in New Orleans to make a truly rootin'-tootin' Dixie-whistling Confederate submersible of their own in a true act of Southern patriotism, culminating in the construction of the aptly named Pioneer, being a two-man operated battle brick measuring 30 feet long and 4 feet wide, with one man being the pilot and the other poor bastard being the one who had to hand crank the propeller. Because not only was the technology not quite there yet, but also it's the Confederacy. Industrialization was something of a stickler for them because, well, you know. So, how did the Pioneer fare? Well, during trials in Lake Pontchartrain, it managed to use its cute little clockwork bomb to strike and subsequently sink a schooner. And no, for the landlubbers amongst you, that is not just a slur. It's also a type of ship. The more you know. Calamity struck, however, when the perfidious Union Army started advancing towards New Orleans, and as a result, the Big Three shit themselves and subsequently scuttled the Pioneer on the 25th of April, 1862, fearing its capture and study. Problem solved, right? Well, no, because the Yankees dredged its wreckage up from the New Basin Canal and studied it anyway. You fucking idiots. Presumably, learning from this, the Big Three relocated to Mobile, Alabama to work on a successor to the ill-fated Pioneer. This culminated in the creation of the very creatively named American Diver, also known as the Pioneer 2, because only Union boys can come up with good names for their hardware. Sadly, down in the South, the industrial and military equipment had already been given names by their parents. So what made this submarine special compared to its older brother? Well, the Big Three were tinkering with the expensive idea of replacing the hand-cranked propeller with some sort of automated crank, like a motor or a steam engine. A novel idea. How did it go? Well, they couldn't get it to work. So they brought back in the hand crank, but with the caveat that you now needed 4 people on the crank as opposed to just one, because despite the fact that it was a foot narrower than the Pioneer, it was 6 feet longer. Surprisingly enough though, that additional 6 feet really weighed the sub down, to the point where the vessel was deemed too slow. Despite this, however, they still had it towed down so that they could attempt to attack and break the Union blockade on Mobile. A daring attack that could save the fledgling Confederacy. But then the weather fucked it up, because the second it got into Mobile Bay, it was battered by the choppy water and the currents, resulting in the sub sinking before it could even get within view of the blockade, with the crew very luckily managing to escape, but the craft itself was unrecoverable. So by this point, surely they would pack it in with the whole submersible thing and stop wasting money on it. No, That's fucking dumb, submarines are cool, and third time's the fucking charm. So this is where Hunley really started cooking. They apparently decided to use a boiler from an old steam engine as a hull. Frankly, making it look a lot more professional and not haphazardly thrown together by three knuckle-dragging dixoids. This resulted in it getting the working name of the Porpoise. This, paired with a fancy-pants hand-operated ballast system, meant that the 39-foot steel beast was an engineering marvel for its time, boasting a mighty crew of 8, with 7 of them being on rigorous crank duty. All of that cranking was to spool up and operate the mighty 2.6 kilowatt propeller at the rear of this absolute specimen. At its peak, it could reach a blistering 4 knots with its mighty 3.5 horsepower of good old southern grunt that drew the short straw. Come July of 1863, the now christened Hunley was already flexing its mighty maritime muscles, managing to attack a coal flatboat in Mobile Bay under the supervision of Admiral Frankie Buchanan. And boy howdy was he impressed. And so was the rest of the Navy. They were so impressed that the Hunley was to be transferred to South Carolina to help relieve the blockade. And how did they get there? They got transferred to Charleston by train. That's right, they didn't sail the Hunley there because the trek was just far too long for these 7 crankers and the propellers were far too weak. So the submarine took the train. I don't know why I find that so funny. And you might be wondering, how did the Hunley actually attack boats? Well, it didn't have torpedoes or anything like that because that requires a motor and that kind of technology was far off. So what the Hunley actually did was use something called a spar torpedo, which was essentially a really, really long pole attached to the front of the sub with a bomb at the end of it. And that bomb contained 135 pounds of black powder. And what they would essentially do is ram the enemy ship like a fucking narwhal and stick the bomb to the bottom of the ship's hull. And there are disagreements about how exactly this worked, but one theory was that there was a harpoon on the end of the bomb that would stick the bomb to the wooden ship. Then the crew would start hand cranking in reverse, and as they reversed away, a line that was attached to the submarine and to the bomb would start to get pulled tight. And once the Hunley was out of the blast range, the line would get pulled out of the bomb, triggering its fuse, and boom. Well, that was the plan, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Hunley was en route to Charleston when calamity struck once more. Upon arriving at Charleston, the Hunley got hijacked by the fucking Confederate Army. You see, for context, the Big Three were technically just private individuals producing and manning such weapons under the oversight of and with the patronage of the Confederate Army and Navy, as in, they were privateers. Remarkably based, in all honesty. Therefore, it was only now that the submarine was to become a proper Confederate warship, under the Army and not the Navy. Boat autists are undoubtedly seething right now. But why did they do this? Well, other than the fact that it's a privately owned military-grade submarine, it partially comes down to the fact that they already owned a chunk of it through the patronage of one E.C. Singer, who was a Confederate spook that bankrolled a third of the project. Therefore, that vessel is partially owned by the state, and therefore was probably eligible to be nationalised during wartime. Or something. Because, let's be honest, the government doesn't really need a reason, just an excuse. Despite this nationalisation, the Hunley was never officially commissioned and the Big Three were allowed to remain on the project. Though the Hunley was to be given a proper crew of seamen from Dixie under the command of Lieutenant John A. Payne, formerly of the CSS Chicora. He, alongside several men from the Chicora and CSS Palmetto State, made up the new crew of the Hunley. And on the 29th of August, 1863, Payne made a
minor fucky wucky by accidentally hitting a lever with his foot while skimming the surface. This lever actually controlled the diving planes, meaning that the Hunley just instantly nosedived under the water with one of the hatches still open. Only 2 people, other than Payne himself, managed to get out of the sub in time, with the remaining 5 men drowning. All because their commanding officer couldn't watch his fucking footing. Concluding that the Navy couldn't be trusted with ships, the Confederate Army once again seized the vessel, this time placing it under the command of Lieutenant George Erasmus Dixon. It was then, on the 15th of October, that Hunley himself presumably took command of the Hunley during an exercise that was supposed to demonstrate the sub's submersible capabilities by having it dive underneath the CSS Indian Chief and then resurface on the other side. And as everybody saw the Hunley go under the water, everyone sat there with bated breath, terribly excited, waiting for the Hunley to come up on the other side of the CSS Indian Chief. And it fucking didn't. It just didn't come back up. The sub just went under and didn't come back up. And then the sub wasn't actually recovered until the 7th of November, almost a fucking month later. And when they opened up all of the hatches, the crew, well, they were fucking dead, obviously. Including Hunley himself. So, what the fuck happened with the Hunley this time? Well, wouldn't you know it, the forward ballast tank had been left open during the dive, meaning that as soon as they went under the water, the sub flooded and they all drowned. Again. So, within just a couple of months of each other, we had 2 separate incidents of the Hunley having almost killed its entire crew and also killing its entire crew off due to a cock-up on behalf of the commanding officer. Despite the fact that this is an extremely obvious sign that the Hunley is unfit for human life on board, let alone combat roles. But the Confederate Army, in their infinite wisdom, kept it within unofficial service, culminating in the Hunley's finest hour. And its final one. On the 17th of February 1864, the USS Housatonic, a sloop of war under the command of one Charles Whipple Pickering, I swear to God, I love these fucking Civil War names, was partaking in the Yankee blockade of Charleston. The Dixies were naturally rather miffed by this state of affairs, and they sent forth the mighty and venerable Hunley to vanquish it and free the newborn nation from the clutches of federalization and emancipation. The mission was simple. Have the Hunley mosey on over under the waves to the Housatonic, which was 5 miles off the coast, which is a fair jaunt for the little hand crankers, and then smack its side with their literal boomstick, having the munition on a timer so that the Hunley can pull a smooth criminal and moonwalk out of the danger zone and then get the fuck out of there. This could not be a more simple job to perform. Go in, hit the ship, leave. Well, the Hunley definitely made a good effort, jaunting up to the side of the vessel and indeed managing to strike it with the spar torpedo. And the Hunley managed to avoid getting broadsided and instead was only met with disparate small arms fire. But that's according to official reports. The consensus is rather mixed. Within moments of striking the vessel, boom, and the Housatonic started listing to port before being embraced by the cruel blue mistress. And just like that, the Hunley finally drew blood, and in the process made history. Because this was the very first sinking of a warship with a submarine in human history, killing 5 of the Housatonic's crew. So, mission complete, and now the Hunley was to return to base at Sullivan Island. And it fucking vanished. Again. It fucking vanished. Again, despite officers landside apparently getting signals from the sub indicating that it was actually coming back. They could see a faint blue light underneath the water that would have most likely been the crew's pyrotechnic signal to communicate. And then the light just fucking disappeared, along with the entire sub and its crew. The Hunley and its crew had completely fucking vanished once again and would not be rediscovered for a very long time. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of the case, I'll give you the tidbits. According to some wrinklebrains from Duke University's Blast Trauma Specialist Unit, the theory goes that the explosion from the spar torpedo is what killed them, but not in the sense of it physically damaging the Hunley, but so far as the shockwave of the blast travelling under the water rattled the flimsy cast iron tomb. So much so that the entire crew all received immediate pulmonary blast trauma, and presumably fucking died. How can that only be a theory though? Surely they would have just looked at the wreckage and deduced shit. Well, here's the thing. The Hunley's wreckage was only just rediscovered in 1995, a full 136 years after she disappeared. The process of finding, then dredging her up in one piece and dissecting as much data as we could reasonably glean from this rusted husk was a very long and arduous affair that I frankly don't have the energy to get into. Although it is all very, very interesting, still go and check it out. It's nowhere near as funny as the original story of the Hunley trying to do literally anything. And if you want to go and see the Hunley, you actually can. It's currently on display at the Warren Lash Conservation Centre in South Carolina, and there are even efforts to actually try and get the Hunley its very own museum. Just be careful about going near the thing because it's clearly fucking cursed. So, where does that leave us in this tale of a submarine that killed a lot more of its own Confederates than enemy Yankees? Well, being very honest, this video is a lot more for me than it is for you, because the Hunley is just one of these stories that, for whatever reason, stuck with me when I first read about it years ago in National Geographic. If you were to tell me with a straight face that the first ever recorded submarine kill was achieved by a cursed pirate ship conscripted by the army, not the navy, the fucking army, in the American Civil War on the side of the Confederates, then I would seriously implore you to contemplate additional psychiatric screenings. But no, the fact that everything that I just said in that utterly absurd sentence is actually true just kind of fucks with me. But it's also a frankly fascinating example of the comically macabre nature of history, as well as a very, very important lesson in sunk cost fallacy.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody just subscribe!